Okay, hi everyone, and welcome back. Once again, I am Brett Norton with Beyond Clean. I'd like to thank you guys for sticking with us all day. It's been a great day of conversations on a very, very important topic, and hopefully, you will walk away from this virtual conference with some good takeaways and some ideas on how to implement some change in your departments and facilities. I want to thank our event sponsor, Asculap, and also would like to thank First Case and Power Supply for collaborating on today's event. Our speakers today are for this session are Susie Collins. Susie is the Market Director of Supply Chain at Stewart Healthcare. She is passionate about process improvement and utilizing technology to streamline workflows. We also have Josh Andrade. He is the Director of Supply Chain Management for Honor Health. He brings nearly 20 years of experience in healthcare supply chain and distribution logistics. And joining us as your host for this discussion is my colleague, Lindsay Brown. Lindsay, as many of you know, is the VP of Sales and Marketing for our team here at Beyond Clean. She is an active sterile processing speaker and educator who loves to offer her take on both fundamental and progressive industry topics. The title of this session is Green Teams: How Supply Chains and Clinical Areas Collaborate for Sustainable Future. We all know that collaboration is essential to patient care, but have you ever thought about how it can improve healthcare sustainability? Our panelists will share their insights on collaboration and the vital link between supply chains and the clinical areas they serve. They will also discuss how collaboration can drive long-term sustainability efforts and create a more ecologically responsible healthcare environment. Let's welcome Susie, Josh, and Lindsay to the stage.
All right. Thank you so much, Brett. I appreciate that warm welcome. Josh, Susie, are you both with me on here?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you, Lindsay.
Awesome, awesome. Susie, what about you? I know we're having a little bit of a difficulty with the connection here, so I'm going to ask Brett to work on getting Susie all squared away. Josh, I'm super excited for this conversation. We've had some awesome chats today related to sustaining the health of patients and planets and green initiatives in sterile processing and in healthcare in general. And so I'm really excited to continue this conversation, especially because the session right before this was an opportunity to talk about the practicalities of implementing those sustainable practices in SPD and the operating room. And one thing about the practicalities of implementing sustainable practices is there's also that thing to consider of how do we do this without compromising value and without compromising quality of care. And I want to take that conversation a step further and really talk about the collaborations necessary within a healthcare setting to help drive those long-term sustainability efforts. And so that's what we're going to do today. Josh, I hope you're as excited as I am. We'll get Susie connected here in a little bit. Yes, I love it. I love it. That's awesome. I know that folks tuning in are like, who is this guy? Let's learn more about him. So can you just give a little bit of background about who you are, what you do, and what led you here today joining us for this SP Green Conference?
Of course. Thank you, everyone. And thank you all for having me. I'm Josh Andrade. I'm the Director of Supply Chain Management for Honor Health. I oversee 2 acute facilities here in Scottsdale. We also are expanded into the Phoenix area. So just a great environment, great area to work in, supply chain today. I've got an echo.
Yep, I do too.
Yeah, sorry about that.
There, I think it's all set.
Okay, and as it was said earlier, I've got 20 years of experience in healthcare supply chain as well as distribution. Started my career at UPS and just focused on improving the operation. So I've always been an operational person. I love the Six Sigma, taking an operation and looking for waste and eliminating it. So everything in my life has always been to improve and just get into a sustainable future. So that's part of what led me to healthcare. the added mission of our patient care. And truly, that purpose is why I'm here. And if you're going to care about the patient, you must care about your community. And so that's where sustainability and caring for our environment really take hold. And so why am I here? Because I met Susie in 2014, and now we're co-board members for AMA, a local materials management association. And she tied me into this, and I'm just happy to know her and be familiar with her, and she trusts my word when we have this conversation together. So again, thank you all, and I appreciate this time.
Awesome. Susie, welcome.
Well, thank you. I am having some technical issues for whatever reason, so you don't get to see my charming face on a Friday, but
We did put your picture up in the speaker bio tool, so just stare at that little picture as she talks.
yeah, that's me. I really just didn't have a chance to shower today. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh, wonderful. Well, Susie, we're glad that we got you connected, and we're really excited about this discussion. Can you share with our audience your journey in healthcare and really focus on your transition from the vendor side to the supply chain management side? And we'll start with that, and then we'll talk about how you got interested in sustainability.
Perfect. So I actually began my career as a wee one in dentistry and worked next door to a gentleman who wanted some bookkeeping help. And before I knew it, I was selling surgical lights and tables for Skytron. So my passion has always been kind of centered around the operating room and the procedural areas because I've spent so much of my career there. But I moved on to a product called Space Tracks, which is an inventory management tool in the cath labs. And honestly, I began to realize how much everything cost, and it kind of ignited this passion for me in supply chain. That part of my career kind of put me into consulting, and I did some large projects around supply chain. I was actually invited to do a project at Honor Health, and before I knew it, I was the director of supply chain for Scottsdale Osborne, and the rest is history, right, Josh? And that's actually where Josh and I initially met. And, it's all of a sudden I was an actual manager, did another project, and then came out here to Steward Health. And I oversee 5 hospitals here in the Valley and getting ready to move on to pulling in some from Texas as well.
Awesome. And so here's why I wanted to kind of detail the story of the transition from vendor to supply chain is because we're going to bring that vendor piece into our discussion a little bit later as part of this more holistic collaboration discussion related to green initiatives. So Susie, what got you interested in sustainability? And Josh, I'm interested in your answer of this too. So I'm going to throw that to you next.
I think a lot of it has to do with, I care about not wasting. I think that unfortunately in healthcare, there is a tremendous amount of waste, both from a time perspective, forms perspective, in many, many different ways we can find waste in so much of what happens in healthcare. And as I became more on the hospital side compared to the vendor side, and again, really started learning about cost, when you look at the fact that you can reprocess a high dollar product for less cost and you're saving the amount of time before it gets to a landfill, I think that's an incredible measure. Anybody who follows me on LinkedIn also knows that I have a passion for waste inside packaging. That's a whole nother subject. But I think it's that innate passion of mine to just not have waste. And by having a sustainability program, you can avoid that in many different ways.
Absolutely. Josh, what about you? What got you interested in sustainability?
Just going back to my desire and my drive to improve the operation, I think anytime you can build that sustainable future, you know that the product's going to be there because you returned it. You know that it's going to be certified, sterilized, checked, and reviewed. And then if you get that at a better price, it's a great opportunity to just continue to use that model as much as you can before it eventually goes to the landfill. And of course, as Susie mentioned, you save that time or you delay that time where it does go to that landfill. And so if we can just get that mindset, if we can reuse, repurpose, recertify the stuff that we're wanting to use on patients and just build that better tomorrow, we should.
Absolutely. In your opinion, Josh, we'll start with you. In your opinion, so we're going to get into this idea of collaboration as it relates to sustainability efforts. And in your opinion, why is collaboration versus, a supply chain only initiative, for example, why is that collaboration so crucial for successfully sustaining those initiatives within supply chain and all of the clinical areas that supply chain touches?
Well, that's change management. You can't have a sustained change if it's one person or one party driving that change. So what we did at Honor Health is we built a sustainability committee, and that committee is not just supply chain. It's made up of clinical leaders, clinical team members, financial team members. We have teams from different aspects of healthcare, and we're all driven to the same mission. We're all hearing the same things, and we're all brainstorming ideas for that next initiative. And so that's where it starts. And then once you have multiple voices, multiple avenues coming to each person in the organization, describing the purpose and the reason for the change, you start to get that buy-in from multiple people. And as that buy-in gets bigger and bigger, the initiatives get bigger, and we start to really see that change happening. And so we just want to keep evolving and keep growing and keep learning from each other.
And Susie, I heard you say along the way as Josh was talking. What would you add to that?
I think that, there's things that we have to prove to folks in terms of, does the product work as good as the OEM? I think that there are times when they may have a relationship with the OEM, which makes them not want to use the sustainable option. So I think it's about communication, and I think it's about building trust with our departments. And by doing that, they'll listen a little bit differently, because the loyalty should really be with the site itself, because everything that we can do will add up. So whether that's recycling our wrap when we can, avoiding, wasting washing instruments just to have a case canceled. There's a lot of ways that we can prevent waste. So I think it's about communication, and I think it's about working together as a team.
Yeah. Josh, you listed off quite a few different, potential participants in that collaboratory effort. From your perspective, where do sustainable efforts typically evolve from? Like, is there a specific department that you're familiar with that usually comes up with this idea for a green initiative and then kind of shops around to the different stakeholders that might be involved? What does that process look like? And does it vary from facility to facility?
It could vary, and sometimes it's just people driven. A lot of times you'll see it from supply chain, because some of it could be cost initiatives where you could save by doing one thing or another. Some would be from patient care advocates, where they just look at opportunities. And then, of course, some might be from infection prevention. Most recently, we moved to a reusable gown, which just happened to be double benefits. One, we're sustaining that reusable gown, cleaning it, bringing it back in for isolation, reusable gowns. And we don't have that cost of the disposables constantly, even during the pandemic. So it helps from a cost initiative, environmental safe initiative, and just sustainability, we're just able to have that product on hand when we need it the most. And so it does come from different avenues, and not everything's going to be a cost savings, but the purpose is for saving our environment. And again, last year we also had bikes for kids. So we donated, all the team members, everyone within Honor Health and anyone outside of Honor Health had the opportunity to donate their old bikes in any condition. They just brought it in. We had a third party company come out, refurbish, repair, and give back to our local community.
Love that. What a great example.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. You know, when we talk about collaboration involving all of these different parties, what are some of the initial barriers? And I'm going to throw this out to either one of you. What are some of the initial barriers to this type of like multi-functional collaboration? And how can data help you? What is the impact that data or, you know, the culture of the departments, what impact can those things have in getting that buy-in initially and kicking off these efforts and in sustaining these kind of projects?
I think, again, it unfortunately, you know, it does come down to relationships. Sometimes part of what will make people not want to participate is because they have a connection with the vendor and they don't want to see something happen with their level of business. I think the second piece is if they, you know, because we had this when we went to reprocess pulse ox, right? You know, it was a great savings. We didn't want to throw those out, but we had a lot of nurses who were convinced that they wouldn't work for the same amount of time. So it's getting the right information. It's showing the cost savings. It's asking them for a level of trust for, you know, maybe we say 90 days. And if we document that there were issues, we're going to go back to, you know, the primary vendor and we're going to work it out. But I think it's about gaining that trust and understanding the roadblocks and asking and having champions. You know, if you have champions at each of the department levels, because some of these things that we're putting out, it affects everybody on the floor, right? So having a champion within each department that really understands the project, I think, is another big key.
And I would just emphasize that communication and ensuring that they truly understand why we're doing it. And like I said, it's not always about cost savings. This is an opportunity to make sure we have the product available, churn it as many times as we can as allowable, and understanding that these aren't just put back together out of nowhere. They are sterilized completely. They are checked individually as opposed to an original manufacturer checking in batches. So that's the big difference between reprocessing and ordering direct.
Interesting. You know, I can't help but ask, and this is a little bit of a tangent, but you know, my sterile processing brain is you know, going a mile a minute here, and we got an interesting question that came in related to those reusable gowns, and I can't help but ask you to elaborate on the role of infection prevention in some of these initiatives and whether or not it's like a must-have to have an IP on these groups, because I'm not hearing from you that everything that you're doing in supply chain for green initiatives is about cost. That's very clear that that's not the case. However, green initiatives that stem from different departments may have different reasons. And related to this collaboration conversation, how do you rectify when a department isn't on board with your like root reason for making a change? And what does that process look like? Have you sort of traversed that territory before?
Yes, so constantly monitoring. It's one thing to have a great idea. It's another thing to communicate that idea. And then the last piece is making sure that you're following up on that great idea. So having the data behind any returns, the quantities that are received, quantities that we're getting back, those have to be monitored and communicated. We can't just leave it on the table and say, go at it. You have to continue to have those conversations, continue to train, continue to have your flyers. If it's a certain color bin, a certain product, you want to make sure everything's identified and constantly bring that back to the table. I did see the question, what are the cons for using reusable gowns? I think with anything, you want to make sure that you have the product being received by the company, cleaned by the company, and returned by the company. So any break in that process is going to be an issue or could be an issue. So if you're expecting to have 100% of your gowns returned, you want to make sure you're not tearing it in some fashion. So any cut or hole, it's not going to come back. You want to make sure that you're keeping up with those quantities, monitoring how much is going out, how much is coming in, so that if you do need to purchase additional to backfill, you just have to be on top of that.
Susie,
and I think another interesting piece of all of it is, engagement with the vendors beyond just materials management. So, having those vendors out on the floor, educating the charge nurses, doing little impromptu sessions, if a few of the nurses have a chance to, step away from patient care, putting information up in the restrooms, in their break rooms, wherever we can, just, and encouraging questions. Because I think sometimes there's a big difference between wanting to educate people on why we're doing this versus telling them we're going to do this, right? It just helps them to, at least that they feel like they have a voice. So create an email box that they can send questions to, respond to those questions. I always say we can't over communicate in healthcare because we can't over communicate in healthcare. and if there is a valid concern, address it the best that we possibly can.
Absolutely. Something that I know a lot of folks are going to resonate with are some real life examples that you can share related to how your respective teams have implemented sustainability strategies in your own hospitals. And really, not only that, but what were the lessons learned through those implementations? So whichever one of you wants to go first with this is great.
Do you want me to go?
Yeah, go ahead, Susie.
Sure, go for it.
So here's an interesting one that, this was kind of more of a forced issue. So a while ago, we were having a very difficult time getting the pads for, oh my gosh, why can't I think of this word, Josh, that you put on the patient so they don't get shocked? Help me out, bud.
Sure.
The grounding pads. Oh my goodness, it's been a long week, people. Grounding pads. We were having difficulty getting them. We were concerned about, how we would manage that. We've got them in our C-section rooms. We have them in the operating room. We can't be without a grounding pad. So we began to do some research about the reusable ones. My first concern was they're going to throw it away. So my vendor came in and promised to make sure that every single person in the operating room knew and understood that pad was reusable and that, it wasn't going to get thrown away, and that we created a process around it. And the outcome of this is, one, now I have more of a fixed cost, which is awesome from a budget standpoint, but we're putting so much less grounding pads into the trash in a year than I even really thought about until after we did this project. And again, the education from the vendor, the buy-in of the team, them understanding, talking about our savings, the reusables paid for themselves in 3 months. So it was a really big win when we really did it out of necessity, but I realize now it's probably a project I would do in any operating room that I was in.
And I would echo that same plan. As I said before, you have to communicate as often as you can. You have to bring in flyers, get into the huddles, have executive leadership, have members of the day-to-day operation be involved in all these communications. On our webpage, we also posted about reusable gowns and how we're staying up with that, the reasons behind it. We've got a sustainability page. You cannot communicate enough, as Susie said, and as you all probably know by now, you just have to get out there. You have to just be in everyone's face about it. You've got to have the flyers, you got to show it. Hopefully you can get to a colored printer, but make sure you get it done.
Awesome. Josh, do you have any real life examples that you would share about these sustainability efforts and kind of what lessons were learned through the process?
I go back to the reusable gowns. At first, a lot of people just didn't understand why. We've got disposable gowns. We've been doing it forever. Why do we need to go to reusable? We just had to get in front of them. We went to all the huddles. We talked to everyone from the daily huddles to the executive huddles to the network huddles. It was communicated to everyone often. We send out emails, personal emails. We sent it out. We just hit it all at once. It was a slow start until we started doing that. And once we did that, everyone started to see it, understood it. And then once we got it in place and implemented and they saw that we were able to get the product right back and it wasn't going to hinder any kind of care, everyone was bought in at that point.
I would love to be in that pitch just to hear it, because even sitting here, working in SPD, I hear the word reusable PPE of any sort and I sort of bristle against it. And so I assume there was quite a bit of pushback at first. And you talk about that communication piece, but what did that look like? What were some of the main like pushbacks that you got at first that you really had to work through with data, with communication, and with really telling the full story?
I wouldn't say there was pushback. I don't recall any real pushback. It was more of, why are we going to this? What's the reason behind it? Why can't we just keep the disposables? And we were buying a lot of disposables. So we did have it on hand. We still had it even after the reusable because we just didn't know how the churning would be. So it wasn't as much of a concern at that point because by the time we went to the reusable, we still had a huge allotment from the end of the pandemic. So it was more so just a lot of training, a lot of conversations. Yeah. And like I said, eventually everyone understood it at that point. So the communication is key. You have to be clear on the reasoning, the purpose, and how it's going to function. And so any of that piece missing, it's going to lead to uncertainty. People are going to make up their own stories if they don't know the truth. So that's where you start to have those issues and pushback.
Sure. Yeah, making sure the narrative is consistent. Go ahead, Susie.
Well, and I think it's important too that we continue to share information, because one thing that healthcare does well is launches any type of program and then they stop talking about it, right? So those successes continue. So like we typically send out, especially to our OR team and the SPD team, when we get our quarterly business review from our sustainability partner, we share that information. We share the amount of weight that we saved out of the landfill, because they do have a way of disposing them. So even when they stop reprocessing them, they do have a better disposal process than what we would have just here in the operating room. I think the other thing is that it's important that we have true, tangible goals and numbers to share, and then we're consistent about whether it's through a newsletter or whatever it might be, telling them that we are still doing it. Because so often we have initiatives start and 6 months later, everybody's kind of forgotten they were part of something. So I think reminding them that they're still part of something long after the launch is really key as well.
You know, that leads into my next question really, really well, because celebrating success is obviously a really big deal for these kinds of projects. So along with making sure to keep communicating the project's success, what would you advise on how to really celebrate that success and do it well?
Well, we can definitely do better at that. We certainly advertise it, send it out there. Great win, great win. The thing that I would want to see more of is tying that into a capital project. So if there's something that was out there that we needed funds for, and we were able to save that through a sustainable initiative, tie those together. And there's a reason why we have the funding now, and this is why we're able to do this or that, have this employee engagement party, because we're able to hit this sustainable initiative. We saved this amount, and this is going to add to our ability to do this in the future.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I agree. It is funny that we had to, not funny, we made a change because though we had been collecting pulse oxes, because my contract had changed, I was able to collect pulse oxes through a different vendor. So it wasn't so much that we had to tell the nurses to start doing it, we had to change their process. So I kind of put the onus on the vendor a bit, but I encouraged him to bring pieces of chocolate, bring some candy, bring something with him. So as he had these discussions and was meeting up with people, they understood. And, you know, again, sometimes it's as simple as giving somebody a piece of candy or, you know, a chocolate bar, just kind of makes them feel like they had a good day.
Yeah, I think we lose sight of how powerful those small gestures can be sometimes. Yeah, just in like a little, hey, even checking in with people, a little piece of chocolate, things like that go a long way sometimes. You're right. Susie, I love what you said in terms of stating the numbers and like how many pounds of waste you saved from the landfill. What other numbers typically are really powerful for staff when you communicate how successful a project is going to be?
Obviously dollars. I mean, we can certainly share with them the cost savings, and I think that that's very important. And Josh alluded to that earlier. Can we tie those cost savings into another win? And I think it's letting them know it's when we're doing a project, especially depending on who it is impacting. Like I said, there's certain things that impact everybody on the floor, right? Then there's also things that may only impact at a department level. So I think breaking down that information is important. You know, we had a little bit of a situation during COVID because there was a little bit of fear, and it sounds crazy, but, you know, people were double gloving, even though it really was not necessary or even recommended from the perspective of, you know, infection control. We also needed to share with them, like, if everybody is doing that, here's what's going to happen to our glove inventory that's already stressed. So I think when you can share tangible information in any way versus just saying, we don't want you to do this or we want you to do this, it's incredibly important.
Yeah, really understanding that why behind big changes, even little changes, understanding why it's happening and the impact that it will have can really help with the long-lasting nature and the sustainable nature of those sustainability shifts. Let's say that someone was basically starting from scratch. They have big ideas in their mind, they're at a brand new facility, and they want to really take the lead on some sustainable initiatives, kind of for the first time for this facility. What are some of the challenges that come up when you're implementing sustainable strategies in a healthcare organization? Let's start with that, and then we'll talk about how you can actually overcome those. But what are some of the biggest challenges that come up when you're implementing sustainable strategies?
I would say not branching out and pulling the right people into that conversation. So we will all have great ideas, but if we can't communicate that effectively and we can't get the right people in place and we can't get the buy-in, it's not going to go anywhere. So don't get held up on your great idea. Have a conversation. And if it turns into a pretty good mini idea, start there.
Yeah. And I think the other piece of it is making sure that you allow the time for trial. They have to have the trust in the product. So especially when you're moving to something reprocessed that's going to physically touch a patient, and that's anything from a trocar to, again, a pulse ox, the clinicians have to have the trust that the product is going to react the same, work the same, not be bad for patient care. So having the appropriate trial period and allowing people to see, touch, and feel before you actually go live.
Yeah, having that time to really familiarize yourself and understand how it impacts your current process. I can obviously see that that's going to be a big reason for the success or not of any sort of change, any sort of shift. That makes perfect sense.
Yeah, and I should say too, because I forget sometimes I do this, but I always forget to talk about it. Also involving your night and your weekend. We cannot leave out those other shifts. There are people who only work on weekends. There are people who work at night. So again, taxing your vendor with that, making sure that you're getting all shifts and everybody, because that happens a lot too. Something gets done and it's a surprise to the night shift. They didn't even know it was going to happen. So those getting everybody that's going to be involved on all shifts, I think, is super important for the folks listening, that we don't forget them.
Absolutely. I love that you keep bringing up the vendor's role in all of this, because I really want to spend the next while talking about what that collaboration looks like when supply chain, when clinicians, and when vendors are really working together to accomplish a goal. Paint a picture for the audience on what that looks like and the benefit of really bringing in that vendor support.
I feel like first it's about choosing the right vendor, understanding everything they're going to be able to offer, what kind of team are they going to be able to bring in, what does their implementation plan look like, how do they handle nights and weekends, getting all of that information. Then as the project gets launched and they're out there with the staff, that they make sure that the information they're giving is, quite honestly, purely clinical and not salesy, right? No offense to vendors that might be on the call, but it's one thing to sell to me, right? But when you're with a clinician, it has to be, how does the product work for patient care and nothing else? They don't need the bells and whistles. They just need to know how it works. So I think an understanding of that and creating some boundaries that we don't have scope creep when they are out on the floor. Don't show the nurse something else that they might want. Focus in on the product and do what we have to do. And I think having that type of conversation and transparency with the vendors is incredibly important. And involving your educators. I mean, if I'm even somewhat thinking about a new product, I'm letting my educators know that even before the rest of the world, because they are bread and butter when it helps for launching anything.
Yes, shout out to all the educators on the call for sure.
Yes, 100%.
Yes, and so what I would add to that picture of what does collaboration look like, if we're in it for recycling and cycling through, we're looking at that process. So we send back, they clean, they send back. We have to have that trust that we're going to put it in the bin, they're going to collect it in a timely manner, they're going to sterilize it in a timely manner, and they're going to ship it back when we need it. And that process needs to just continue to flow. And if there's any break in that flow, you start to lose trust and you start to lose any accountability for the implementation.
How do you, and just speaking from your own experience, what does your monitoring process look like? Because you speak to the trust that's built, but obviously there's got to be some sort of monitoring to make sure that all of every step of those processes has that flow. So what does that look like for your facility?
It has to be part of your KPIs. You have to be able to see that on a routine basis. The information needs to be fed in a routine basis from the vendor, showing how much they've collected, how much they've sent back or been purchased. And you've got to keep that in everyone's purview. Everyone has to monitor it, everyone has to be on top of it, and everyone has to have that conversation when it's not happening as it should be.
Yeah.
And I think the other piece of that is the data that we get from our partners that we use for sustainable products. They can give us very specific information. So if we do, for some reason, have a department that is far less than they quote unquote should be, or based on what their patient volumes are, you know, going and finding out what kind of roadblock there is. Is it, you know, somebody doesn't have access to get into that room? You know, maybe there's that bin was missed last time and it was full. I mean, whatever that might look like is just, again, taking that business review and sharing that information with anybody that's impacted by it.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's a really great point. Susie, I'm curious, and you can opt out of this question if you want, but just since you just throwing that out there, since you do have that experience coming to supply chain from the vendor perspective, do you remember any specific sustainability projects that you were on from the vendor's perspective, and sort of what that looks like from their end? Because we do have some vendors on this conference, and I'm sure they're curious about, you know, the role that they can really play when they hear of a sustainability effort that's going on in some of their partner hospital settings.
Yeah, I think that the biggest thing from my point from a sustainability is just to not waste product. And I you know, we really haven't talked about the fact that there are things that get expired, right? They expire on the shelf and can no longer be used. There's some things you can donate to Project Cure, but obviously if it's something that works with a piece of equipment, donating it may not be viable. So, you know, working with Space Tracks and back then being able to have expiration information on products, being able to proactively work with a vendor to either get it traded out, is another site going to use it sooner, having that information readily available. It was exciting to work with the customers because expiring products is such a huge problem in healthcare, and it just that was exciting to be able to target. Because I guess that's the other piece of waste that I didn't mention earlier. I mean, when we talk about sustainability, part of it is, you know, use what's on your shelf. Know that your par levels are accurate. Know that, you know, it's a product that's still in use. I know when I went and helped clean up kind of, you know, the Tempe setup, you know, they're like, oh yeah, Dr. Jones used to use it and he hasn't been here in like 2 years. Then let's find a new home for it. You know, so right. I think repurposing things is another big part of, you know, sustainability efforts is use what you have and don't buy more than you're going to use.
Yeah, and I think a part of that is being intentional and smart with your space. If you've got product that hasn't been used in 10 years taking up space, that's a huge area of opportunity. So yeah, thank you for bringing that up. And I want to just do a quick call out related to Project Cure. If you're unfamiliar with that organization, their website is projectcure.org. It's CURE.org, projectcure.org. So if you're curious about that, I haven't thought about that organization in quite some time. So thank you for bringing them up.
Yeah, they're fantastic. And my plug for them, it's it's not just about supplies. It's about instrumentation. It's about, old stretchers. They're willing to take so many things, and that means we're not putting it in the landfill. So I have a great relationship with Project Cure here in Phoenix, and I would much rather see it go to them. Even things go to Habitat for Humanity. I would much rather see that happen than for it to end up in a large dumpster.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you for bringing that to everyone's attention. One thing that I do want to know is, as leaders in your field, where do you see the future of sustainability in healthcare supply chain management heading? What does that future look like? And either one of you can take this question.
Well, I can start. First, having committees, people involved, more structured approach to green initiatives versus the ad hoc, let's have this great idea. So having that committee, being focused on not only the products that are coming in and out, but the things around you that you can affect. So if you're looking at electricity, water conservation, here in Arizona, that's a big thing for us. Honor Health recently looked at going to desert scape versus watering the lawns. We've got this area of grass at Shea, our Shea Medical Center, just large area of grass that was constantly watered. We took that out and brought in turf so that we weren't wasting the water or going to a lawn that had to be reseeded every year. So things of that nature are where we're headed. And then once you get past that, then you're looking at your suppliers, then you're looking at your manufacturers. How are they treating the environment? And then that's going to be the next push. How green are your partners?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I think it's, for me, there's two big things. And one, I, again, will get on my soapbox about the amount of paperwork that is inside boxes. It's obscene how much we end up throwing away because you've got instructions that nobody looks at. It needs to be a QR code on the box and no inserts. My second thing is really taking a look at the amount of plastic that we continue to use in healthcare that does get thrown out without being recycled. Everything from an Emerson basin to the pitcher that we give the patient, there's such a huge amount of plastic, and it does slightly amuse me when people are worried about straws because we are doing so much more to the environment. I hate to say that, but I think there needs to be discussions of how we can get rid of plastic in healthcare. There's a lot of it that I think is redundant and overused, and I think there's some opportunity there.
Okay. What else comes to mind when you think of the future of sustainability for healthcare supply chain? Any other big themes, any other small themes, anything that comes to mind?
I think we're going to see reprocessing continue to get more and more activity. As we talked about earlier with the expired products, there's that little part of me that says there has to be a way, instead of wasting that expired product, that we can check it, make sure it's okay, and repackage it so it can have a longer life, a longer shelf life. Because when you really think about it, I would say 92% of our products in healthcare do have some type of expiration. And granted, some of them are quite long, but not all of them are. So I think that looking at how can we reprocess expired products that haven't been on a patient. And that's the key. I mean, we can reprocess trocars that have been used in a case, but why can't I open something that's expired, make sure it's functionally still solid, and then re-sterilize that item, maybe even myself, right? Is that something that becomes part of what SPD does? I don't know. It could be a very interesting discussion, but I think reprocessing of supplies has got to be on the forefront of everybody's mind.
Absolutely. What does this sort of future that you see, what does that look like in terms of really engaging frontline clinicians, frontline supply chain professionals, so that you really kind of hardwire that sustainability focus? What are some small steps that can lead to that future that you see?
In the onboarding, as you're onboarding our team members, showing them why we're doing it, how we're doing it, so they can truly understand first day on the job. And then, of course, recycle them as we can. Let's get the same people doing the same roles every day. No, I'm just kidding. No, so just ensuring that the communication's
that's powerful,
out there.
though. Yeah, like just kind of using that to set the tone for new employees. That's a great idea. Absolutely.
Yeah, and asking our vendors, it's we can get complacent, right? We just accept that this is the way it is. But asking some of our partner vendors, what are your plans for either reprocessing or allowing us to send you an expired product and get one back? Ask them, are there ways that we can do this better? Find out, again, what is their policy for returning expired product? If we give them 6 months notice, is it a direct swap? Because it's not, if we don't have to expire that product ever, there's a lot of wins in that. And manufacturers probably have a better way of disposing of those types of things than what a hospital does.
Right.
So I think, asking them as part of the contracting process, I think, could be very interesting to work that in, to have shared wins in that area.
Absolutely. An example that comes to mind is a sterilizer manufacturer that I know of that actually, if there are defects in the plastic molds, or I don't know if it's actually plastic, but the plastic type molds that they make for their product, they actually melt them back down and reuse them if there are any defects. And so it's not a wasted piece to the sterilizer, but it's an opportunity to melt it back down and try again. You don't have to call out any specific vendors with this question, but are you aware of vendors who communicate well their sustainability efforts and initiatives that they have going on? And does that matter to you in supply chain to hear that from them?
At this point, go ahead, Susie.
No, go ahead.
So at this point, I'm not seeing it as broadly advertised as you would think it would be. So hopefully it's just them really ironing out their process. And I'd expect it to really come to light soon rather than later.
And I think you have me thinking a little bit more that I probably need to ask a few more questions of my vendors. I mean, there's things that I do see on LinkedIn. There are times that a vendor will kind of use it from a marketing perspective, but then sometimes I can shoot holes in that. So I think that it's I know I'm bad, but having those conversations, I think
you
that
can, everyone in the front lines can. So I feel like
I think we have to have those conversations, and we were all a bit distracted over the last few years between COVID and, quite honestly, with all these manufacturer back orders, that we're constantly in a state of solving problems, and we've lost that ability to put some time on our calendar to be proactive. So maybe that's one of the takeaways of our discussion today. What can you do to put some time on your calendar? Instead of focusing on problems, maybe we try to focus on some future solutions.
Yeah, that's powerful. As we wrap up this discussion, I want to know if there are any final words of advice for other healthcare institutions that are looking to create their own green teams, if you will, or implement sustainable strategies in supply chain management specifically. What advice do you have for those folks? Josh, we'll start with you.
I would stick to my theme for my answers today is put the right people in the right place. For us here at Honor Health, the VP of Supply Chain, Ryan Karani, is our chair of the Sustainability Committee. Alongside of him, we've got a senior analyst for supply chain that really does the hands-on, boots on the ground work, helping to get the vendors in, give the data, feed the data, and make it readable to anyone in the committee. And then after that, you've got the clinical team, you got the finance team, you got everyone on board to brainstorm ideas and then implement them.
Yeah, I think just as a follow-up to that, because I agree with everything Josh said, is to create either a SharePoint site with information, communicate through a newsletter, whatever we're able to do is keep that communication out and don't stop following up. Give people the information and keep it going, and don't lose sight of the good work that everybody's doing. Because if you really think about it, when we're asking them to collect things, right, that we can reprocess, and we're asking them to put things in a different bin, you are legitimately asking them to do extra work. It might only be a few inches apart, but they're having to be very conscientious about what they're doing. So we need to keep that growing. And then maybe once a year, try to do some type of event where you kind of celebrate it in the cafeteria. You share the waste that you haven't put in the landfill, and maybe you ask for other ideas, and you get people kind of more excited about what else can we do.
Yeah, I imagine it's a contagious effort. Once one thing shows success, that momentum gets built, and everyone starts asking the question, well, what's next? What else can we do to make an impact? And when you talk about green initiatives, like, it's hard to not think big picture. It's hard to not let your brain just go automatically toward, whatever we think of is going to be too big for us to actually put in place. But like Wes said in the previous presentation, those small drops of water will carve out a river. He said it more eloquently than that, but it's very true. Those small projects, those small initiatives will lead to big change and big impact. And I think that that's something that everyone needs to remember as they're thinking about green initiatives in their own healthcare facility. Oh, you guys, I wish we could keep talking for the next hour, but we do have another presenter to get to today. Thank you so much for joining me for this discussion. I'm excited for the folks who tuned in today live. Shout out to the educators once again. David, thanks for your comments. You're important in this process too. We're excited that you all tuned in today to talk about these green initiatives, these green teams, these collaborations, these conversations that will hopefully help light the fuse. And hopefully if you're here tuning in, you're going to be that catalyst for change at your facility. And how cool is that? So Susie, Josh, thank you for your insights. Thank you for your expertise, your ideas. We're really excited for what comes next for everyone who has tuned into this discussion. If you want to connect with Susie or Josh via email or on LinkedIn, their contact information can be found in the speaker bio tool on the right-hand side of your page. Just a quick reminder that your CE certificate will automatically be able to be downloaded at the conclusion of this session. So just click on the little icon at the bottom of the page, download your CE certificate, and then nursing credits are available following today's conference for the entire event. We are going to take a quick 10-minute break, but we'll be on to our final speaker of the day. It's going to be an awesome one. And we're really excited to get to it. So thanks everyone for sticking with us today and joining us on your Friday. We're excited to go into the next session. And Josh and Susie, thanks again.
Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you,
Lindsay.
Susie.
Take care, Josh. Bye.
Yeah, bye-bye.